All right. So this is a story where Paul and I really pissed off my Uncle Bob, and I'm going to tell it from my angle. All right. Now, we're back on the Lake of Lucerne at my uncle's house. It's gorgeous. I've talked about this in the first couple episodes. And Paul and I have this idea that Paul's going to swim across the entire lake of Lucerne. He's not going to swim around the circumference, but he's going to swim across it. Right from my uncle's house, the little chalet that he rented a room, to a restaurant that you can only reach by boat unless you swim. It's a restaurant that is serving Switzerland's best Alpen macaroon. It's like a traditional Swiss pasta dish that my uncle said is really, really good. Now, Paul and I were trying to save all of our money, not going to restaurants at all, always cooking, always just eating just loaves of bread and cheese and chocolate and fruit from the supermarket. So this was going to be our splurge. We were going to pay for a meal at a restaurant. So it was cutting into our budget, but we were going to work for it. Paul was going to swim like about a mile, over a kilometer at least. And I, not being the champion high school swimmer, I was going to kayak using one of my Uncle Bob's really old school fiberglass, very wobbly kayaks that he had. So this was our plan. And it worked out great because my Uncle Bob got sick. And I'm sorry that he got sick, but he basically said, guys, you're free from my plans, because my Uncle Bob always sort of was the ringleader and wanted to take us in along whatever his plans were, which were always fun. Don't get me wrong. But he got sick, and he said he was going on a cherry fast, which basically meant to my uncle that the best way to cure his sickness was not to go to the doctor, not to go to the pharmacy, but only eat cherries for the next several days. So that's what he tells us. I thought that sounded kind of interesting. And so me and Paul planned to do this lake crossing to eat this Alpen macaroon, this Swiss dish, and we were excited. So we plan everything, we get everything ready. And the morning of, I'm dragging the kayak down to the beach. I have to go down these rocks. It's kind of sketchy clambering down these rocks to get to the water, even to go swimming, but with a kayak on my shoulder. It was extra dangerous. And my friend Paul comes to me from the chalet, fresh from where he was talking about Uncle Bob, and he says, Ryan, this kayak trip is off. I said, what? No, it's not. It's not off. We're going. I thought he was scared. My friend Paul is more of a daredevil, but I think his will is sometimes a little wobbly, whereas mine, perhaps to my detriment, I've gotten myself into a lot of trouble by just steamrolling ahead, regardless of the dangerous possible outcomes. So I say, no, it's not. He says, no, Ryan. I talked to Bob, and he said, you guys can't go swim across the lake today because I just called the dragon lady. She's a Ukrainian woman who was his friend, called her the dragon lady because she had a dragon tattoo. She was like in her 30s, lived up on the top of the Rigi, this like holy mountain in the Lucerne Valley. And he said, I called her, I invited her to dinner, so you guys need to go shopping to pick up all the ingredients for this incredible meal that I'm going to cook, and which you guys are going to clean up after. I mean, that was basically what my Uncle Bob told my friend Paul. And so he looked disheartened because his big plan, he's a champion swimmer and a bit of a daredevil, but he's also very agreeable. And so when someone says something, he kind of just says, okay. And I said, fuck Bob. Yeah, he's my uncle. I love this guy. I'm so happy he's invited us. But he specifically told us we have this day to do whatever we want. We made this plan. We are going. Plus, we had also had a lot of drama with Bob, and we're sort of at the point where we were ready to take off from Switzerland and embark on our own adventure, just the two of us. So I said, Paul, we're going. And so poor Paul is caught between the desire and the will of my uncle and the desire and the will of his best friend. And he chose me, thank God. So we get down into the water, and so I start kayaking, Paul starts swimming, and we can see the shore on the very end. We can see the building. It's like this little speck on the horizon. The water's not too choppy at this point. We don't really know how long it's going to take. Paul's a great swimmer. He's pure muscle. He can swim for hours and hours in a pool. Let's see what happens. I have to be very careful that I don't tip over this kayak, because it tips over really quickly, and if it fills up, I don't know how we're going to empty it. It was not a self-bailing kayak, so I had no margin for error. Now, I was going in a kayak, obviously, because I didn't feel confident swimming, but also just in case my friend Paul had any sort of emergency, like he just gassed out, well, I would let him hold on to the kayak while I paddled. Two people with very little experience, 21-year-olds in Europe, just going and rolling the dice and having some fun. So we start going, and I quickly realized this is not going to be as fast as we anticipated, because primarily Paul is just coming up for air as he's swimming, and he can't really see the horizon, and he's not necessarily listening to my directions. Maybe he wouldn't even be able to. He's swimming really hard, but he's sort of zigzagging, and I'm trying to course correct him, and he's zigzagging, and then he comes up and he says, "How far are we, Ryan? And he can't really see, because there is a little chop in the water, and we have only gone like 10% of the way, and I lie to him and I say we're about a quarter of the way, because now I think it's sometimes you need to lie. Now I'm an honest guy. I wouldn't have a YouTube if I wasn't a little honest about my life, but I had to lie to him because he was starting to panic. Now, this is with any sort of risky undertaking, right? Like if you go for a 7-day hike in the mountains, you might want to run back to your car after the first day. You go to run up a hill, and then you almost want to go turn around, because your mind starts to come up with all of these possible scenarios of death or all the things that can happen. So I realized he was panicking. It wasn't that he was actually in danger. So I said, we're just about a quarter of the way. Now, I couldn't tell exactly. I didn't have any sort of navigation or instruments, but, you can see the tree on that shore and the tree on the shore we just left, and you can sort of see the size difference, The trees on the opposite shore are really tiny, and the trees that we just left are really big. So we keep going. He keeps zigzagging, coming up. Are we there yet? Are we almost there? And I'm like, we're almost there. And I lied to him so much to get him across. And then when we got about halfway across, these high mountains on the other side sort of cast a shadow on the water. And once we got in the shadow, it started to become really cool. Even the water was cooler. Everything was cooler. And Paul was starting to surface with a pale face, and I realized he was losing temperature. I don't know. Maybe some of that was fear, but I was starting to actually get a little worried. But I still continue to encourage him with as much optimism as possible, because I wanted to keep his spirits up. It's almost like if you ever watch fighting, like a boxer or an MMA fight, your coach in the corner, of course, he has to give you the reality of what you need to do to win, whether you're behind on rounds, so you understand that you have to, really give it your whole go. But they also have to make you feel like the champ and make sure that they give you the encouragement and the confidence to continue the fight another round. So I was kind of like the guy in his corner, just giving him as much encouragement and positive optimism. You got this, Paul. No, we're almost there. even though we weren't almost there, to keep him swimming, because to return wasn't going to be much easier once we were past the halfway mark. And we were going. I really wanted to get across that lake with him. I wanted him to have that accomplishment. I wanted to be there with him to celebrate his glory with a beer. And so I kept pushing him. Well, eventually we get across that fucking lake, the Lake of Lucerne, excuse my language. And it was a triumphant feeling for me, but for Paul, it was kind of, you know, if you've ever seen someone, you know, who's just been at sea for a long time and they finally climb up to the shore and land and get on the land and kiss the dirt, that was Paul. He was pale. He had lost all his blood, you know, that was going to the skin. He was cold. But we got across and it was glorious. And we get into the restaurant. No one's at the restaurant. We have this beautiful Alpen macaroon dish, which is like a pasta with just lots of cheese, rich cheese. Tasted delicious. I gave Paul like a third of mine because he needed the energy. It had a beer. And while we're having a beer, this big, gigantic whale of a German named Joe just beaches up from swimming as well. This guy had swam from a shorter distance from another area of the lake, a little less than my friend Paul, but he was fine. He was healthy. He was about middle age, probably about 50 years old, big, tall, balding, hugely fat guy, but he had flippers on. He had those rubber flippers that, you know, give you a lot of pep. So he joins us at our table. We have a beer together, and he congratulates Paul for making it across. For him, it was no big deal to swim across this lake. Big Fat Joe, the German. And then after he finishes his beer, he just plops back into the lake and swims back across. So me and Paul sort of extend our stay there because he needs all the energy he could possibly get. And I'm starting to get the feeling that this might be his last meal, because he looks horrid. He looks wretched. He doesn't look like he's going to be able to swim back across. He looks like he's on one step away from death's door. So I kind of have, you know, when you're around someone who's on their last moments of their life, you just sort of, you have this very gentle, relaxed attitude, and I just say, have more of my pasta, because I felt he might die. And what further, you know, gave me that feeling was, it was getting now later in the day, and we saw lights flashing on the buoys in the lake, and storm clouds just sort of rumbling in over the lake where we just swam, and the waves were now moving with the wind that was coming in. So the lake, not only was he going to have less energy, and, you know, frightened about, because he knows what he's up against, but it's colder, it's later, the waves are choppy, there's emergency lights flashing on the buoys. What are we doing? What are we doing? You know, maybe we should have gone and got the groceries and been Bob's bitch and cleaned the dishes so he could have that nice meal with his dragon lady friend. I don't know. But here we are. There's no going back. So we finish this meal. We walk back down to the shore where the kayak is. And I'm thinking, well, if it gets really bad, he'll just hold on to my kayak and we'll just inch our way back. He won't die, Ryan? No, he won't die. I'm telling myself. I don't know what he's telling himself. But he's feeling worse than I am. And just as we're about to embark on our way back, a boat pulls up, like a kind of a nice speedboat. Family gets out with a massive dog that my friend Paul, I mentioned before, he loves dogs. So and Paul is a shy guy. Paul is not the type of guy who approaches strangers, but he will if he needs to. So he runs up to the dog, hugs the dog, pets the dog, and says with the warmest greeting to this Swiss family, "Oh, is this a blah 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 breed? You know, he knew the breed, and they understood his English and said yes. And he goes, oh, wow, I love this breed. By the way, are you going back to the other side? I would love a ride with you. So, they very kindly, after their meal, gave Paul a ride back in their boat across the lake. So we avoided Paul's death, luckily, by the sake of that wonderful ice breaker of a dog. And but me, I still had to go across this now a very stormy, tempestuous lake. I mean, it was no sunshine. There's storm clouds overhead. The buoy is moving up and down in the middle of the lake, shining its light. And here I am in my Uncle Bob's 1960s fiberglass, non-self-bailing kayak, being very careful. Luckily, I have good balance. The people I roll with at jiu-jitsu, I've got pretty damn good balance. And it was about an hour and a half, maybe a little longer, but I got across that lake without tipping. And got the kayak back up. Paul was waiting for me at the shore. We walked up the steps of the Swiss Chalet, where my uncle's apartment was up at the tippy top. Opened the door, and there my Uncle Bob is with headphones on, watching his really old TV. He's watching the Blues Brothers 2000. I think that's what it was called, that movie. And he's like snubbing us. He's not even making our gaze. And I had no compunction about what we did, because we all had an agreement. We were free. We had a plan. You can't barge in on our plan, right? Right? So I go up to Bob. I say, hey, he made it. And he just snarls at me and says, I had to cancel my plans with the Dragon Lady. He just went on with his sort of selfish rant about how we let him down. And I'm just going to watch this movie, and put his headphones back in. But hey, we made it. Paul swam across that lake. I kayaked across it twice. We had a beer with the big fish Joe, the German, and had our Alpen macaroon. So that's it for this story, and the next story I'll bring to you soon. Thank you for watching my series. My name's Ryan.